This is Via Voices, the podcast that brings you insights from the champions of international education. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, and together we'll uncover the stories behind impactful global learning experiences and the professionals who make them possible. From growing up in rural Kentucky to 30 years of countless global connections and students impacted, Kathleen Fairfax, VP for International Affairs at Colorado State University, shares how international education changed her world, her career, and her life, and why she's confident about the next generation of global leaders. Hello, Kathleen. Welcome to the Via Voices podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We have had a few interactions over the years, but I've never really gotten to sit down and have a deep dive conversation with you. So I'm really excited to meet you. I want to start with your international education story.
Okay.
How did you find your way into this career path?
It was the way a lot of people do back in the day anyway, when there wasn't any kind of master's degree you could do in international education. And you didn't really think of international education as a career. So way back when in the 80s, and I was a first generation college student. I had never been out of the country. I'd hardly been out of the state of Kentucky, where I was born and raised. And went to college on a full scholarship and decided I wanted to study abroad. And I studied abroad in Bogota, Colombia for a whole semester. It was my first time on an airplane. It was a life-changing experience. Like a lot of people say that a study abroad program can be. It truly was a life-changing experience. When I got back from there, I went my junior year. In my senior year, I went we were on a J-term system, a 414 calendar. I went back to Bogota for a month for a J-term as a translator for a medical group that was going there and providing medical care in the slums around Bogota. And so that was a whole different way and using my Spanish in a different way. But I still didn't think of international education. I didn't really put two and two together that it's a career. So I didn't know what to do when I was graduating. I had no idea. And so the only thing I knew I was really good at was being a student. So I went to grad school.
Yeah, obviously.
That's what everybody does when you don't know what to do. It's like
same story.
I could be a student a little while longer. So I went to grad school in a PhD program, international relations, because that was really what I was interested in, but hated it. Hated it.
I hated the subject matter, hated being still in school, or
I hated the way the subject matter was taught.
Oh, interesting.
And I didn't know enough to know and pick in a graduate program because I didn't get any good advice from advisors in undergrad. And so I picked one relatively nearby at Indiana University, Bloomington, a very good school. But in the political science area, they were what they call a quantitative political science. And so they like to examine all kinds, whether it's domestic or international, based on quantitatives. A lot of the courses had calculus prereqs.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, this is not
what I got.
I got.
Yeah.
And so many of the readings were in these, what I thought at the time were pretty obscure journals. And once I read an article on using the number of theater seats per capita in a country to determine its likelihood to go to war. And then I thought, I'm out of here. This is not real life.
Now I have so many questions.
It's like, it's not for me.
Yeah.
So I decided to end at a master's degree instead of going on for a PhD. Ended with the master's, and I still didn't know what to do. It was before the age of the internet. So I just got the paper and was looking for one ads. It was like, I'll do anything. I just got to support myself.
Yeah.
And I was in Bloomington, so I was reading the Indianapolis Star, the newspaper there, and there was an ad for a study abroad advisor. And I thought, I did study abroad. I never thought about that it takes someone on the other end to kind of build the programs and help students go. Yeah. And I can remember who helped me. And it's like, oh yeah, that might be something I could do. And I was reading the description and, it was like pre-departure orientations and advising students and all this kind of stuff. And I thought I could do that. And then I get to the bottom of the ad and it's my alma mater where I got my undergrad. And the person hiring was my advisor. It's like, I think I have an inside track on this job. So I got hired.
Okay, I was like, you better have gotten that job. I was like, if that story goes somewhere else, I'm going to be so upset.
But I mean, it just it was serendipitous. Yeah. It just fell into my lap.
Oh my gosh.
It's not something I planned.
What's the old saying where luck is just preparation and opportunity meet or something like that? Yeah. So and I feel like you were ready for it because I
was ready and there it was. And so I went and I did that and I started to learn a little bit more about the other, non-study abroad as opposed to participating in study abroad.
Which is very different. A lot of
Very
people don't know.
different. I went to my first professional conference. It was a NAFSA conference way back in it was 1986 or 7. And I remember being totally overwhelmed and not even knowing what I'm supposed to do. But I ended up not particularly liking working at my alma mater. And so one of my dreams had been to join the Foreign Service.
Okay.
So I took the Foreign Service exam while I was working, and I passed it and had to go to the orals. And I went to the orals and passed those and got offered a position in the Foreign Service. So I quit my job at my alma mater and joined the Foreign Service and became in the cultural affairs section. And so worked for a year in Washington, D.C. at the Fulbright office as a Fulbright program officer, liaison with all the Fulbright commissions overseas. And then 4.5 years in Mexico City.
Wow.
When I joined the Foreign Service, young and single, and I could go anywhere I wanted to and do anything I wanted to do. And I met my now husband in training for the Foreign Service. He's also a Foreign Service officer. We went to Mexico City together. That wasn't planned. Actually, I was supposed to go to Rome, and he was supposed to go to Costa Rica. Came to him and said, "Oh, we're a thing now. We're dating."
Yeah.
And they're like, "We don't break assignments for dating people."
Yeah.
I already knew Spanish because I was a Spanish double major, and I'd studied abroad in Colombia and all that stuff. So they want to make sure you can learn a language, so they were going to put me in Italian to go to Rome.
Right.
I hadn't started yet because I only starts not very often at the Foreign Service Institute. Spanish starts all the time. My husband was already in Spanish training. And so when they said, no, we don't break it for boyfriend, girlfriend, we said, okay, fine. So we went and got married after 4 months of knowing each other. So we got
love
married,
the story so much.
Came back and said, we're married. Can you give us the same assignment now?
Oh my gosh. Were they shocked?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they tried to tell us it's not going to work. You know, we've seen this happen. And we just celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary.
I assume you're telling the story because it's
still going. Still works.
That's amazing.
So we joined the Foreign Service together. I ended up, that's why I worked in the Fulbright office, had to wait for him to finish his Spanish, and they just canceled I'd never started Italian. Never got to go to Rome because of him. But we went together to Mexico City.
Yeah.
And it was great. We had our first kid in Mexico City, then our second kid in Mexico City, 18 months apart. And then it became, you all have to leave Mexico now. You have to go to another post. That's the way the Foreign Service works.
Yeah.
And there's just no good post for two people like that. Mm-hmm. They were really going to be
small children. Yeah.
Where it's safe to take small children, or it's not a no dependence post. So we decided to quit, resign. And again, pre-internet. So we both agreed we would each try to find a job in our relevant field. So I wanted something in international at a university, which is pretty specific. My husband's in advertising. So it's like, I really hoped I got a job first and he would follow.
Yeah.
Because he could get a job anywhere, whereas I couldn't.
Yeah.
So I got a job first at a small university in Texas. I'd never had a program before. Started a program with but after we had been there about a week, the plan was we'd go, I'd start work. My husband would get the kids, who were then 9 months and 2.5, in daycare. And then he would get a job. After a week or two there, he said, okay, we have to talk. I was like, all right. So can we make it on one salary? I'd rather be a stay-at-home dad.
Okay.
So he was a stay-at-home dad for 10 years. Third kid came along, I think purposely so that he could stay home a little bit longer and be with the kids even longer.
Knowing what he wants, though.
I know, and it worked out great. It allowed me to do what I needed to do for my job, to travel when I needed to travel, to work nights and weekends when I needed to. And he was the kind of stay at home, the stability for the kids' life, except it wasn't as much stability as we thought. One of the reasons we left the Foreign Service is we both kind of were born and raised in the same spot and really valued that sense of roots, you know? And we thought, if we're moving all over the world with these kids, they're not going to have that. And we like that. So we're going to go back to the States. And then I was only in Texas, where my first job out of the Foreign Service was for 2 years. And then I moved to Purdue, was there for 6 years, then Michigan State for 7 years, then Arizona State, then South Dakota State, and now Colorado State.
Yeah.
So we moved a lot.
Yeah.
within the U.S., but very different culturally.
Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I feel like you bring up a really interesting subject. I think people are probably having this conversation. I have just not been a part of it. I don't have children. I do think that that's very interesting about how our very mobile jobs, whether we're going to different opportunities professionally or just needing to go to a site visit or some kind of partnership thing you're doing in India, but knowing the toll and the logistical planning that people have to make with their loved ones, just to, if they want the family life, and
it's hard. And I think that's really why proportionally you still see fewer women in the higher senior levels, because traditionally it's been the women who've made the sacrifice.
Right.
And they don't move to take a new job because they need to stay home, be the stability in the family. And I'm just fortunate that my husband was willing to play that role.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, when I had, when they were 4 and 5, 1, 4 and 5 or something like that, and I had to go to Australia, got to go to Australia for 2.5 weeks. That's a long time to be away from everybody.
Right.
And, he just handled it all.
Yeah. I whenever a lot of women in our field have children, but when they are at a leadership role and they'll be like, oh, I just got back from Buenos Aires and next month I'm going to wherever. I'm just like, you are amazing. I don't know what kind of magical elixir you're having, but it's really cool.
There are a lot of trade-offs because even though, like I said, I've been fortunate to have my husband be able to take care of the family, there's still separation, of duties. We agreed long ago when we first got married that any yard work like mowing the grass and stuff would be me, but snow shoveling would be him. He's from Minnesota.
Okay.
So we lived in Arizona and it's like, but then we moved to South Dakota and it's like,
lots of snow in South Dakota. We have
that South Dakota
connection for sure. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about technology. Obviously, Via's a technology company, so I'm always curious how other professionals sort of see technology or look to use it and leverage it as a tool to make our work easier, faster, better, et cetera. Because you've been at so many different institutions and you've been around for a while, you've seen the evolution. Can you tell me about what it was like and where you were and when you first started adopting technology to run your operations?
Yeah, 1986 in Indiana, when I took that job at DePaul University, my alma mater, and the person who'd had the study abroad advisor, coordinator kind of job before me in the office, the only thing there was a typewriter. And we had to give lists of the students going on which program to the financial aid office and the registrar. And every time there was a change, she would just type a whole new list. I was like, okay, wow. I know there's a thing called word processing where it's really easy to update. And then right away, I needed to do budgets for some of our programs. And she had them, again, on a typed out sheet. And I said, okay, I didn't know how. I didn't know how to use it. But I said, I'm going to teach myself the equivalent of Excel because I need to do budgets in a way where I can set a cell for the exchange rate and change one thing and have the whole thing change. I knew the technology could do that, but I had never been trained in some of that stuff. Way back when in the 80s. And ever since then, I've really been a proponent of using technology to be more efficient. So when I got to Michigan State in 2008, we were already sending well over 1,000 students abroad and a little homegrown access database.
Yeah.
And it didn't do anything that we needed it to do, really. It was a glorified file cabinet, just the names and whatever sort of technology. So we really invested in developing. We ended up doing a homegrown system at that time, but a pretty robust database and a way to let students know about programs, a way for me as a director of study abroad there to be able to look at how the workflow was flowing to each of the staff, like how many advisees did this, because interest of students change. And when, it might be balanced. And then in 2 years' time, suddenly everybody's going to Italy. And the person who has Italy and Spain and whatever is like way overworked. And so using technology for efficiency. But I think what really drove home to me the power of technology was in the health and safety area, because nothing can substitute for good technology. When you're caring for students who are overseas, responding to a crisis, keeping track of students, providing good information, linking up to embassies and what have you. I think that the whole kind of field of health and safety changed dramatically with technology, and it's so much better.
Yeah.
I can remember early on in the early 90s when AOL was a thing and email was starting to be a thing. I would go to a conference and there would be literal debates and sessions about we shouldn't allow students to use email while they're abroad. Because then they're not immersing in their culture.
Yeah.
And other people saying, but you can't really stop them. Well, we're going to try. This program is going to be built. You cannot have the technology.
Well, that sounds like the early 2000s when it was all about no Wi-Fi, no internet.
No.
Right?
No,
the
don't
same
go to
argument
internet
was being
cafe.
made.
Oh, no,
Oh,
don't.
yeah. That is fascinating.
But from the beginning, even though I agreed, when I studied abroad, I had one phone call all semester with my home. And it was, you live for those airmail letters that you got on the red, white, and blue, thin paper and everything. I believed in how I had to push myself without that family connection.
Yeah.
But I'm not the student of today or the student even of the 90s.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to go if they didn't have that connection.
Yeah.
And so the more important thing was getting them to go, not dictating how they went or how much they stayed in touch with their family or not.
Right.
They figure it out for themselves. A lot of them start with a lot of close contact with family. And then as the semester progresses, we start getting panic calls from parents. I haven't heard from them in 4 days.
Yeah.
It's like, well, they're probably having a really good time. We're busy with classes. So it's okay.
When it comes to health and safety, when I started at the university in South Dakota, my first thing after I did all the HR paperwork, they said, so can you find out who's abroad right now? And so I basically spent the first couple of weeks just going department to department, introducing myself and saying, are you aware of any students from your major that's abroad right now, or any faculty that might have been talking to students about it, and trying to find where they were. And we had probably maybe 20 students abroad.
Still trying to find them.
Yeah, you're right. And I think technology, for me, obviously, I'm kind of a technologist. I believe it can be a tool for good. But I think what it does, though, is that it makes some of the components that used to be really challenging, like, the budget off of a typewriter took forever, right? And and if you had to redo it, it took another,
and you couldn't fiddle around with variables like exchange rates.
And now that we can seamlessly do those things in a much more rapid fire, accurate way, it leaves more space and time for you and your team to do the work you signed up for. You didn't want to be on a typewriter all day. You want to be talking to students or designing programs.
And then when the pandemic hit and it forced us all to rely on remote ways of connecting.
Yeah.
I hated the pandemic for everything it was, but it did really force people who may not have been comfortable with technology into using it. And now on things that really require a lot of international connection. And I'm in charge, for example, one of my units is all international student recruitment. So as opposed to constantly sending people abroad, which is very expensive, how about, or in partnerships, if you do 1, 2, or 3 Zoom meetings first, establish if there's interest, establish if there's trust, and then cement it within something in person. I don't think that technology is a substitute for in person. But it can certainly make it more efficient. You don't waste your times on fishing expeditions or things like that. By the time you go, you're ready to do some stuff together.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. I feel like grad school, I led this faculty-led program, and I was working with a professor at Oxford, and we did all of our communication over email. This is in early 2000s. And we were coordinating all the things, doing all the things. And then when we arrived, I got off the coach, and I walked up to him. I was like, hello, I'm Brooke Roberts. I've been the one communicating with you. And he goes, good God, you're a woman. So for 6 months, he
never actually.
But why would that come up? I mean, and it was before the days of including your pronouns and things like that.
Right,
so
right.
I will never forget that
so
moment.
Funny.
God, you're a woman. He was so kind and nice. It wasn't but
it was in his mental image of you with the name Brooke. It could be androgynous.
And he's like, oh, I have so many students named Brooke. And they're all men. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. All right. Back to you. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's good.
We have a lot of, big challenges, changes happening in our field right now. And I'm just curious if there's a particular challenge you're particularly concerned with. And maybe it's specific to Colorado State or Colorado specifically that you're really focused on and really empowering your team to tackle right now.
The really tricky thing right now for all of us is that we've focused at Colorado State anyway, and I know a lot of other places that do, in really trying to make study abroad and other forms of global engagement as accessible as possible. Accessible means financially, But it also means having a diverse participation that is at least as diverse as your student body. And so if your student body is like ours is about 27% minoritized students, then we should have that percentage going abroad. And we didn't. And so doing special outreach, finding out why are we missing, and you can't lump them all together either. There's a very big difference between a first gen, a rural, an African American from Detroit, and a Native American from out on a reservation. There's so much difference, and a lot of it's cultural. And so really trying to look at how do we make sure that this is not a white middle class thing to do.
Yeah.
The global engagement is for all.
Yeah.
And now we just spent last week in my office scrubbing the word diversity, equity, and inclusion from our website. We run the risk of losing federal financial aid for our students, which they also need in order to be able to participate in study abroad.
Right.
So it's really hard now. The biggest challenge for us now is dealing with a conflict between what we value and what we think is the way forward for our field versus what we have to deal with in terms of political realities. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
And I know my colleagues in Florida and Texas and other places have already dealt with things like this. To me, it feels a little bit different. It's never been a sense of having federal student aid thrown into the political mix.
Right. Yeah. It sort of like felt like, oh, but that's sacred. We don't touch.
Right. That's a state. And I'm in Colorado.
Yeah.
And Colorado really values diversity. We have an openly gay governor. It's a very diverse kind of place. We also rely on federal student aid. About 13,000 undergraduates at Colorado State have federal financial aid out of 29. So a third of them have some kind of federal aid. We would make college not accessible to them, not to mention already, international.
Right. And it's already a big reach for a lot of young people. Yeah.
So it makes it challenging. That's our biggest challenge right now is how to stay true to your values and do the work we're going to do and not risk hurting other people in the process.
Right. We both have a similar background. Right. We both grew up in rural communities. You're Kentucky. I'm from Kansas. We bonded over this one time many years ago.
Yes.
I had a conversation recently with someone. I was back home visiting my mom, and the farmer Joe down the road basically was like coming over to deliver something. And he's like, Brooke, you're here. And we're just chatting. And he's a lovely man and helps my mom out on the farm. And it's great. We started talking about some political things. They always knew me as like that girl was always bouncing around the world. So good for her. That's so cool. And I said, well, what's happening right now is really impacting my world. I mean, I haven't lost my job, but we don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to hurt numbers and all these things that could result in me directly losing my job. And he was like, I don't understand how, us funding you going to do that stuff, how's that helping us? I was like, I'm an example of how it helps us, coming back to speak at my high school and running mentoring programs with kids who want to like even go out of state to go to college or something. I was like, those things have to happen because people have to have these other experiences. And my point is, I want to bring back to you, how has your upbringing kind of helped inform how you kind of approach your work in international ed, especially knowing that there's a lot of people who don't get how your experience abroad impact the broader community.
Right. And I think that being a first-gen college student, neither of my parents had gone to college, and seeing what a difference it has made in my life to have an international educational experience like I did as an undergraduate, and in turn, how I have been able to help other students like me who were first gen, who had never been out of their state, who didn't know much about global. When I applied to study abroad, I spelled the name of the country wrong. I spelled Columbia with a U, like it was New York and not the country, because I didn't know any better and I still got accepted. So that's good.
Yeah.
They were willing to overlook that. But helping, I think I added it up, and this was a while ago, that directly or indirectly through the programs run in offices I've been in, it was upwards of 18,000 students that had study abroad experience because of the offices I've been in. And what that can do, not only for those individual students who then come back, but what it does for, I'm a believer that people-to-people diplomacy is how we achieve world peace. It's not strong guy politics. It's really others getting to know us and us getting to know others. And I still remember when I studied abroad, it was the age of Dallas on TV. And it was a host family. I was living with the family, and they were just so surprised. And they told me, they said, you're nothing like that girl on Dallas. That's what they thought all American, women were like. And I was like, well, no, I'm not. I'm just an ordinary girl. then we have the international students come, and Muslim students and other students, and our students are like, oh, they like to go out and throw frisbee too. What?
Yeah.
This is weird.
Yeah.
So the difference it can make in trust between people and understanding how the world works and wanting to make the world a better place and multiply that by thousands and thousands of students. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, just like, even if you think about it, like in the work that people will go do in their futures, in their careers, of if they've had some kind of meaningful connection like that, intercultural experience, where now they're on a team, they're sitting in a Zoom call with their colleagues from, I don't know,
Malaysia,
in
whatever.
Malaysia and Estonia, and now they're like, okay, how are we going to manage this? And,
that's right.
How are we going to navigate some of these cultural
and maybe
nuances?
Not knowing the culture of each of the places, but knowing, that misunderstanding was probably cultural in nature. So maybe let's just talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I just think there's so many like valid use cases, if you will, where it's like, this is really relevant in a lot of instances.
So many fields.
And we're just so, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but we're so interconnected. Like, for instance, I was talking to my partner who also grew up in Kansas. His family runs a family farm, ranch and planting as well. I was talking to his dad, and he understands how like USAID cuts are directly impacting him.
Yeah, they're not going to buy our grain now.
Right. Yeah. And he gets it. He's like, this is not good. I don't know what's going on, around the world. I'm not that guy, but I know this isn't good for us.
From my days way back when in the Foreign Service and working at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, the USAID people were just some of the most dedicated, hardworking, in it for the passion of making the world a better place.
Yeah, nobody's getting rich at the USAID.
No, and they're not. They're in places that are somewhat difficult and challenging, and they're making these relationships at a person-to-person level. They're some of the ones I looked up to the most.
Tell me about the last book you read.
Right now, for about the past year, I've been on the kick of reading science fiction.
Okay.
I never read science fiction ever as a kid or anything. Although I liked Star Trek as a kid, I never really read science fiction. I was always kind of a murder mystery, escapism sort of thing. And so lately I've been reading science fiction, partly as escape. It's like, okay, well, maybe if the earth becomes intolerable, then we'll have a way that we can go somewhere else, But some of the books actually get fairly deep into questions of what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to have a conscience, to think? Why do other things that have complex brains not think So all of that, like, what does it really mean to be human? And that also ties into questions of religion and theology. And it's from someone who was born and raised Catholic.
Yeah.
Just got me. It's had me thinking. And some of them, some of the books I've read, you actually encounter like alien life. And it really is just a cross-cultural experience.
Yeah.
They're trying to communicate and they don't use the same words. I'm trying to figure out. And it's like, it's all this. It's like what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I feel like I can always find parallels of like all my friends who work in other fields and stuff. They'll talk about something. I'll be like, that is a cross-cultural experience you were having.
Exactly.
You didn't get on a plane and go somewhere, but that's what's
still
happening.
Cross-cultural.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
I feel like I want to hear more. I have so many more questions. We'll have to do a part 2, but thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.